Welcome back to Football Unspoken. So, Josh, today I'm going to rant at you for a little bit because I'm pretty annoyed about the arrogance of the Big Six, not just their fans, but also the media around them. And the reason why is being a Newcastle fan, we've just won our first trophy in 70 years. Alexander Isak is a massive part of that. And it's obviously international break right now. There's no news around football. I understand that. But every single media outlet, every single football pundit or football podcast is talking about how Alexander Isak will go to Liverpool or Arsenal and is going to win them the Premier League. And I sit there and I go, why? Why would he do it? He's got 3 years left on his contract at Newcastle. He can try and push. He can try and push to leave, but I think that makes a player look worse. I think a lot of clubs will take that personality trait into account because if he moves to Arsenal and Real Madrid come in, what are they going to do then? Liverpool are in the case of losing Trent Alexander-Arnold to Real Madrid, which we just spoke about. And they're thinking that they can nick Alexander Isak off us and Real Madrid won't come and do the same thing to them. It's just one of those. And I think there's coming to a point where the Big Six fans and the media around them are just creating this environment where as soon as there's a player outside of that Big Six who performs for 1 or 2 seasons, they're immediately like, oh, they're going to go to these clubs. This is what's going to happen. You have it with Isak, you had it with Tony, you had it with Watkins for a while. You've got all these players. And do you think I'm using the right term is kind of the question. Do you think that I'm using the right term in arrogance? Is there arrogance? Or do you think that maybe I blow this out of proportion is actually not as big a deal as I think it is?
It's really funny just there when you said, am I using the right term? The term I thought you were referring to was the top six, because I know, to be fair to you, for about a decade or longer now, you've fought me quite aggressively about this term top six. And you've been saying for over a decade now that this term is old, in terms of you look at the top six every year and there hasn't been a single season probably in the last decade where all 6 of the top 6 are in the first to sixth position. So I thought that was the term you were going to say. Are you correct in using? But so there's a debate to be had there. In terms of the arrogance, I think it's absolutely there. There's a very clear barrier basically where top 6 teams do not buy from other top 6 teams. It's not, there's examples from Chelsea to Man City where it does happen. But if you look at the frequency of which Bayern Munich buys players from the other top 3, so Leverkusen, Dortmund, and whoever the next one would be basically in Germany, would be a far higher percentage than, say, Man City buys from Chelsea, Arsenal, Liverpool, all of those. If you look at how many players, even Real Madrid and Barca, they still buy players in Atletico Madrid, who's third place team, but still, not outside of that top 2 position. And they, like Griezmann going to Barcelona, and Koke and players like that, all moving from Atletico to Barcelona. So my point being is that in the other European leagues, it's far more common for a team in the top, say, second to fourth, to sell to their top team. Where in the Premier League, it's almost like a no-go, where Man City won't sell a player to Liverpool or vice versa. Like there were rumors at the beginning of this year that not Gakpo, the Colombian one, why am I drawing a blank, and not Darwin either. Diaz, thank you. I don't know why that was so hard. Diaz, there's rumors of Diaz going to Man City, but realistically, it was never going to happen because top 6 Premier League teams won't sell their star players to each other. So there's almost like, well, since Man City can't buy Saka, for example, or one of the other top strikers in the league, such as Diaz, they have to go and buy Isak because it's almost seen as a step down. Oh, we can actually buy them. So to answer your question, what is that arrogance? I believe it is. The one other thing that's kind of funny about that is, you tell me, how much money would a Premier League team have to pay for Isak compared to how much would a Spanish or German, if you understand what I mean, a non-Premier League team? I feel like the number would be lower significantly.
Yeah, 100%. Well, you look at Isak going to Newcastle. It was just 70 odd million, and then there's sitting there going like, oh yeah, we'll just take Alexander Isak for 90 million. And you're like, you're going to pay 200. Realistically, he's got 3 years on his contract. And don't get me wrong, I understand this idea of player power and players can push can push to move. But realistically, they are under contract. And it's one of those where I genuinely believe that there are guys at the top of Newcastle who would rather see Alex Isak lounging in our reserves for a season and a half than send him off for 90 million. Like it doesn't make any sense because it also wouldn't really impact our FFP overly. It's not a situation of we get selling him for 100 million would impact our FFP and we could replace him with 4 players. No, we couldn't. We would be able to get one half decent replacement. So it doesn't make any financial sense. But the thing that really, really grates me is when the pundits sit there and they start, you got the Gary Nevilles and the Jamie Carragers of the world sitting there going, oh yeah, Isak would do so well in Liverpool. He'd revolutionize their team. It's like, he's revolutionized Newcastle. What do you mean? Like, he's come in, we've won a trophy for the first time in 70 years. And I'm not sure if you've seen the celebrations and that, but like the parade, the bus parade is better than Man City's treble bus parade. But the other thing I was going to talk about is also Aston Villa, another team who kind of suffer from this as well. With Morgan Rogers being there, Tyrone Mings a couple of years ago. I mentioned Ollie Watkins earlier. And again, you're sitting there with like, oh yeah, well, Manchester United just need an Ollie Watkins to come in and be their main striker. And then there'd be Manchester United are nowhere, absolutely nowhere compared to Aston Villa. But it's still spoken about in terms of this. It's a step up. If you're going from Aston Villa or Newcastle to Manchester United, it's a step up. And it just comes to me as complete and utter arrogance. And I don't know how you combat it, to be honest.
Yeah, I don't have a straight up answer on how you combat it other than years of performance. When Newcastle start coming and they're on the cusp of it, top 4 year in, year out, eventually there's a certain threshold you break through where it's like, well, they're a bigger club than Tottenham. They frankly are probably already, and that's an easy statement as an Arsenal fan. But I'm a little annoyed because you called out the fact of how important it is actually for the Premier League to have a one club city like Newcastle in the league as a top team. And it sounds like a funny thing to say, but from a geographic standpoint, it actually helps the business model of the Premier League because you have so many teams down in London, right, who are top 6 teams. And then you have a group, basically 3 in London, 3 in the greater Manchester area. I know Liverpool people are probably screaming at the computer right now. Greater Liverpool area, greater Manchester area, whatever you want to call it. But the point being, it's quite a small area, quite a small radius, and the London radius are the only 2 areas of top 6 teams. Where if we lose Newcastle and Aston Villa for that matter as 2 top 8, I'll use that term, teams, and we replace them with, say, Brighton and Everton, we're in big trouble. Now it's Greater London, and that's all we have. And I think for the Premier League as a product, you want it to be as expansive across the UK as possible, including as many areas. And that's why it sounds like such a stupid statement. But when you really think about the Premier League, like I say, as a league, you want a Newcastle in the mix. Ideally, you want a 1 team from London, 1 from the Greater Manchester Liverpool area, 1 from Newcastle, 1 from Midlands, as title contenders every season, because that's almost like the battle of the areas of the UK, and that's going to make a better product and a better league. So that's what's funny to me. The pundits aren't more supportive of a Newcastle project. Going back to something else you mentioned about the Carabao Cup win and the celebrations, I always find that funny. I know you love the celebration police in general, but the one thing I just wanted to add to that discussion was around, is in Newcastle have won a trophy in 70 years. And what are you supposed to do when you get given a fixture? Are you meant to just not win the game? You know what I mean? Like, you've won the game, you've got the trophy, you have to celebrate that. The last thing I just want to add to the discussion, because I know it's a longer one here, but when I look at Aston Villa, I don't feel like they get as much disrespect as Newcastle from the transfer sake. It is, oh well, Edic's going to Liverpool for 90 million. I know there's been rumours of the Villa players, but I almost feel like there's more respect for their project than the Newcastle one. And I wonder if that's got to do with the managers. And Emery on a global level, on a European level, is more respected than Eddie Howe is. Now, tell me if you think that I'm just waffling here, but that's something that I've kind of observed.
That's actually a great point. It's something I hadn't really thought about, but as soon as you said it, I was like, actually, that makes sense because Eddie Howe is still a very disrespected manager. I sit there and I go, he is top 5 managers in the Premier League, and I don't care what anyone has to say. I would say he's pushing closer to that top 3 as well. I realistically think that the top 3, uh, it's obviously Pep, 100%. I was going to say Jurgen Klopp, but obviously that's last year. To be fair, Arne Slot might have slotted himself into second, actually, to be honest, because of how well he's done this season. And then it's probably Emery at 3. And I think 4 is a battle between Arteta and Eddie Howe. And Arsenal fans are going to slap me when I say this, because they love Arteta and they're allowed to. But I genuinely think that he should be way more respected. So I think that having Emery has definitely helped Aston Villa go a little bit under the radar in terms of that transfer, So I do think that was a really good observation, actually.
When you're looking at Newcastle, the project now, not the individual players or until all of that combined into one, the Aston Villa project gets a lot more respect from the exterior world because of what Emery's achieved as a manager versus Eddie Howe. And you could argue that Howe, over a long period, has actually achieved more on English soil. Emery's reputation is all on Spanish and French soil, etc. But he has won a lot of trophies and a lot of Europas, for example. So to your point about is Howe the right guy to take Newcastle forward, I actually think he is. He's never been given the opportunity before. So just to assume, oh, he can't do it because he hasn't been given the chance was kind of like when Newcastle had Chris Hughton and he got sacked before he even got a chance to manage properly in the Premier League. It's like, well, you don't know yet because he hasn't actually had the opportunity. And that's what it seems like is happening with Eddie Howe, that he's being written off for taking Newcastle to the next level before he's even got the chance to prove it.
Yeah, that is definitely something I agree. And I know this has gone on a little long, but I do want to kind of round off with one last question for you. And I just want to see, is there any way that this kind of arrogance that the Big Six fans and the way the media talk about them, and specifically when it comes to transfers and the smaller teams being able to just kind of pick off whoever they want from the smaller teams, is that justified? Is there a reason for it, essentially? Is this actually justified, or is this just a lot of bluster?
It's interesting. There's been a change in the Premier League over the last couple of decades, particularly since Sir Alex Ferguson left. They used to, Manchester United team used to bully Wigan and clubs like that. So when they bought Valencia, and those kind of players from a Wigan, they would just put it out there in the news, hey, we want to buy Valencia. And he would just succumb to Manchester United. He would say, well, Wigan, I want to leave. This is my big shot. I'm going to force a move. And they would buy him for nothing, peanuts, 12 million or whatever. And even at that time was still peanuts. I know that was more than what it would be today's money. But even hell, they were buying him for peanuts. And Man City would have been that club, but obviously this year with the fall off that they've had, and there's been uncertainty around all the charges against them, uncertainty around whether Pep, how long he's going to stay, and if the sort of the football evolution around tactics has kind of got past them a little bit. Liverpool, they've done really well this year, but I think if you look at the points tally, it's actually not that impressive of a Premier League in terms of total points that they've achieved. They wouldn't have won it in any of the last 5 seasons with their current points tally, for example. Arsenal just you're stuck in second year in, year out. The kind of long extended point I'm getting to is that no longer are these days where you could just pressure a club into selling the player for peanuts. You can still pressure the club into selling. That is still a thing. We haven't evolved past that. But pressuring the club to sell for peanuts, that doesn't seem to be a thing anymore in the Premier League. So I actually do think there's been an evolution. And in terms of what the next evolution for Premier League football and the transfer sense looks like, I'm hoping the top 4 ends up as Liverpool finishing first, Arsenal finishing second. They could finish third. I don't want to think about that, so I'm just saying they're finishing second. But then the hope is you have teams like Newcastle and Nottingham Forest third and fourth, because you want those teams who are going to benefit from the money in the FF, more the FFP in Newcastle's case and the active money, that allowing them to spend more next season. And then you want Chelsea and Man City to finish outside of Champions League because they're going to spend the money regardless. Whether they finish third or fourth or fifth or sixth, they're going to spend that money. But what you want is as many teams in the Premier League as possible having a lot of transfer money to spend, not just because we want money being spent, but because of that whole thing of putting pressure. You don't want Nottingham Forest to finish sixth this year and people that just come poach their best players, and then we don't see any more Nottingham Forest next year. And it's not about me loving Nottingham Forest. It's more just about we want a diverse, competitive Premier League. And the best way to get that is by having different Champions League teams, different European teams year in, year out. So the more, I'll end this by saying, the more we can have Manchester United and Tottenham in like 15th, 16th, the better.
I think most football fans would agree with you if they don't support those two teams. But I think it's been a really interesting discussion, slightly different from what we usually do, a bit more of a rant from my side. But I thought we got some interesting points. But I'd love to hear what you guys have to think. Is there an arrogance in the top six around transfers? And do you think it's justified? Or do you think the Premier League needs to start diversifying its funds? Let us know in the comments below. And until next time, this has been Football Unspoken. Cheers.